Thank you everyone for attending this session. Good morning or good evening, depending on your part of the world. Yeah, welcome to this session exploring the criminogenic roots of corruption in Portuguese local government, a multidimensional analysis based on interviews with 12 local government officials. If you have any questions for our presenter, please type them in the chat box, and we will address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Okay. It's an honor now for me to introduce the upcoming Dr. Leonardo Conde. But before doing that, I just want to say this research was directed, accompanied by Dr. Flavia Noversa Loureiro. And I want to read a short bio of her. So Dr. Flavia Noversa Loureiro, she is a PhD in law and criminology, professor and researcher with numerous contributions in studies, publications, and conferences spanning over several fields, having taken part in many national and international research projects over the years. And she currently serves as vice president and associate professor at the School of Law at the University of Minho, sorry. And yeah, now I want to present Leonardo Conde. Uh, he did a bachelor in criminology and criminal justice and a master's in criminal science. He is an independent researcher and occasional lecturer with previous research, publishing, and speaking experience in several dominant domains of criminology, criminal justice, criminal policy, and prison studies. Currently focuses on studies on white-collar crime, in particular corruption, qualitative studies, risk prevention, modeling, and criminological theory. Welcome, Leonardo, and the room is all yours.
Thank you so much, Mauricio. Welcome all of you. Good morning, everyone. I will first share my screen and then I will talk a little bit. Let me just go over here and start sharing with you. Let me check. Okay, it's already sharing. Okay, so as you can see here, I'd like first to sincerely thank you all for attending this session, and I would also like to express my immense honor in having such an esteemed and respected audience experts here with me in their own fields of criminology and listening to what I have to say. So thank you so much. I promise to the best of my ability that I will try to make up for your time here, and I'll try to stick with the 20 minutes so that we can then have a Q&A filled with interesting questions and discussions, which I'm more than looking forward to hear about your expertise and your opinions on these and other subjects related or not to it. So I welcome you all. I invite you all to pose your questions. So as you can see here, and I'm not always looking at the actual camera because my camera is here, but my screen is here. So mind it, and I'm sorry for it, but I'm just trying to understand and navigate the PowerPoint, also the slides. So thanks so much for being here. And as you can see here, we are going to explore a study which I made about corruption in Portuguese local government. And we will talk about a lot of things here. We are going to talk about an actual framework of it in Portugal. Then we are going into the roots of this research, how it came to be. Then, of course, we are going to talk about its results. And then, of course, we are going to talk a little bit more about the actual model which we developed to understand corruption, or at least to understand the phenomenon that we encountered through the recorded experiences of these interviewees. And so to give you a brief explanation of what happened here, we will first need to address the issue. For those who are not versed on the themes of corruption, I would first like to talk a little bit about it. So we know that corruption, it's a quite huge and complex phenomenon. Everybody talks about it. It's all over the news. And we know that there are international disparities over the definition, the description, the context of crime. And so we first need to frame the phenomenon in Portugal. And to do so, we need to first trace a little bit back in time, go back in time, and talk a little bit about the fact that we know that corruption has been increasingly present in recent decades. It seems like the world panorama has changed in line with social, cultural, and economical factors and dynamics and transformations such as the globalization, the technologies. So, and an example of these, and with these transformations, the social phenomenon has also changed. And an example of this is corruption. It has grown a lot since then, and it has been driven through these changes, and has mainly also took the opportunity with the interdependence and the approximation of states, and it has spread throughout the globe. And we are talking right now in international markets and economies, not only on national markets and economies. So these are becoming particularly vulnerable to the phenomenon, of course, of corruption. And so the economic fluctuations are getting each and every day more contaminated by this actual phenomenon. And so, and this has a lot of consequences, as we know, as a crime of really fragmented victims, which are diverse and which we call macro victimization. So we know that corruption costs about $2.6 trillion per year, and this is a rough estimate, like 5% of the gross product in the world. And so not only we know that it has great economical and political and societal consequences in our quality of lives in general, but we also know that, and I'm sorry if I cough a little bit, I have been sick, but we also know that it does also impact in a more abstract way the rule of law, the public confidence that the community has on their governmental institution and public and private services, and it also impairs the free and equal access, which is a right of everyone to access and utilize the public services. So with this said, we are going a little bit through the Portuguese landscape of corruption. How is corruption in Portugal? Well, we could talk about different typologies of corruption in Portugal. We could talk about a criminological typology, but we are going to stick with the legal definition of corruption. And why so? We know that corruption has been understood as the crimes committed by individuals in an organizational context. We could talk about, for example, in the criminological side, we could talk about occupational crime, state crime. We could talk about organized crime. So there are many typologies in criminology which have been studying white collar crime in general, and under this umbrella, of course, it also fits corruption. However, corruption has not been a primary subject in criminology yet, of course. There has been an increasingly bigger number of studies in corruption over the decades, and we also know that corruption has been studied particularly as an accessory, almost like accessory practice, in order to permit other actions to occur, other crimes to occur. So we need to have corruption in order to launder money. For example, so corruption is almost like studied as a practice that would allow other crimes to take place, as corruption is a form of, in general terms, it's an abuse of power, of entrusted power, or an entrusted public power for private gain. Right now, we don't talk about public power, we talk about public and private, so we suppress that, since over the years we have been seeing that corruption does not only occur in government, so in the public service, it also occurs in a lot, of course, in private services also. So with this said, we could talk about typologies in criminology. However, we know that in the criminal law field, a crime refers to the conduct that the law typifies as such. And this rigor and objectivity might prove to be beneficial in criminological studies. And that's what we thought, and that's why we decided to go with the legal definition. Why? Because we know already that some great criminologists, such as, of course, Sutherland and Donald Cressy, argued that criminology is the study and that the process of the study of the process of creating, violating, and reacting to criminal law. So, in light of the multiple definitions that we could use here and criminological typologies, we did think that in order to actually study the phenomenon and in the real actual local governments in Portugal, we needed to go with a strict definition. And that definition, the strict definition, it's the one that it's made by that it's strictly on our criminal law code or penal code. And that's why we chose this one. And of course, because the definition that the interviewees, the public society knows as corruption, it's the one on our penal code. These were the reasons why we chose this one. And so in our legal anatomy, of course, in Portugal, corruption is also an umbrella term. We have a lot of crimes that we put under this umbrella that encompass corruption, such as nepotism, such as bribery, such as money laundering, and many other crimes. And so to actually understand how this came to be what it is right now, we need to also say that corruption has been in our penal code for centuries too. So since the 16th century, we already have some mentions on penal codes about the abuse of entrusted power for private gain by governments. So throughout the 16th century, the 17th century, the 18th century, the 19th century, and so on, there were many legal reforms that actually came to change it. But right now, what we have as corruption in the strict term, passive corruption, the corrupt person, the corrupt employee who abuses his power, not the person who gives the bribe, is the definition that we have here. So the act of knowing and accepting or soliciting an undue financial or non-financial advantage, or the promise of such for the past or future performance of any act or omission by a public official. And that's our definition. So it's a definition that closely approximates to the form of bribery in other countries. So in Portugal, we do not have a definition, a legal definition of bribery. We call it the actual corruption, passive corruption. And so there are other legislation that also define corruption under these umbrella terms, but this is the one which is strictly the one that it's used on criminal proceedings. So in terms of incidents, briefly talking a little bit about this, we know that the media in Portugal, we have been seeing throughout the years a lot of coverage by the media, and the media somehow focuses on episodic, high-profile corruption, and it lacks, of course, a comprehensive view of the criminal facts of what happened. And so the picture that the community has or stays with is a picture of a almost demonizing approach with a lot of sensationalism. And we know also that from recent studies that the community, the picture that the community has of corruption in Portugal, most of the times is related to what the television news, the primetime news cover as corruption. And so corruption in society is understood as the abuse of public and private powers to obtain a benefit, therefore involving sums of money, actions which reflect, of course, lack of principles and dishonesty. So, and despite there is a high intolerance in Portugal against grave forms of corruption, there is, throughout the studies that have been carrying out, not only European-wise but also nationally-wise, there has been shown a certain tolerance from the community to smaller case corruptions, depending on the circumstances, whether it's to help a friend, whether it's to help a known person, whether it is to help the community somehow. We need to practice a certain exchange of favors. So there is some type of tolerance. And central to the problem of corruption in Portugal, of course, we have local governments. In each and every study we see being done since the 2000s, the local governments have been on the three main segments of society, which people, and of course also the actual statistics say that are the ones with the most incidents. And that's why we wanted to explore, of course, why this happens. And so moving on here to the roots of this research, acknowledging the power that comes and the responsibilities that the local governments have in Portugal, the autonomy that the government concedes, to the local governments, because it has such a great responsibility in guaranteeing the implementation of the financial and success of the financial, political, and societal strategy of our central government. It has a great autonomy, whether it is in public procurements, whether it is in construction, whether it is in water, sewers, and many other things. It is the local government's priority to make sure that these national strategies are ensured and to guarantee the quality of life of those within their jurisdiction. So, but of course, with great power comes great responsibilities, and one of these comes also and setbacks. And one of these setbacks is the fact that with such autonomy, with such responsibility and power, there are a lot of corruption going on in local governments, as I already spoke. And because of this, we came to this dissertation was born, which the problem was really about how could we possibly understand better, deepen the understanding of how corruption occurs in local governments. And ultimately, the problem or idea that fueled the development of this study was whether a scientific criminological approach could actually help solving issues of corruption prevention. As we've seen throughout the years, many preventive strategies have been in place, many mechanisms, legislative reforms, the refreshing of other legislation that had been already in place, mechanisms and legal tools, codes of conduct, and other things. However, the efficacy of the procedurals, the criminal proceedings, of the criminal investigation, of the judicial sentencing has been quite ineffective. So to understand this position and how this came to be, we wanted to see if this criminological approach would solve some of these problems, at least in preventing corruption, as this is, of course, one of the prime objectives of criminology, to understand crime in order to prevent it. And so we notice in Portuguese literature several references to a diverse number of risk factors. And because of that, we decided that risk factors would be our primary objective. So we would study the causes of corruption. We opted not to use causes because it's quite a literal term, but risk factors is something that influences the criminal behavior, the propensity of the criminal behavior. So we concluded that there was a necessity to deepen the comprehension of criminogenic effects and of these risks. And in order to advance the research in the concrete cases of corruption, which was something that the literature was already asking for. So these reasons made the criminological approach, knowing that the legal approaches, the administrative policy approaches have not been working quite so well as expected, we assumed, and given the complexity of the phenomenon, the diverse number and nature of the risks that have been highlighted throughout the years on research and other policy studies, we defined that it would be important to try out a holistic approach. And this, of course, would be our approach in a field as criminology, where the methodology, it's quite maneuverable, quite easy to steer, and of course, given the interpenetration of fields of science which are encompassed in criminology. So not only we wanted to understand at a deeper level what these risk factors meant and how they played their effect in the local governments, because they were too superficial in most studies, they just point them out through a criminological lens, and also with that help preventing further cases, and help building more accurate legal definitions, more accurate preventative policies. We also wanted to see if the criminological approach, which has been lacking in the field of research, would actually be effective and would actually provide good results and productive results in order to comply with these objectives we had. And so this was the problem, and this was the generally the intentions. So to do so, we thought that our object would be passive corruption in local governments. That was the point. And what was our primary objective? To characterize and deepen to characterize the actual behavior, criminal behavior of corruption in local governments, but also deepen the understanding on how it comes to be in these local governments. Why is the incidence on these institutions so high? In order to do so, to actually achieve this general objective, we needed to go back, we needed to set 3 specific objectives. And these were the ones which appear here on the screen. So to characterize the acts of passive corruption, what the distribution, the diffusion throughout the country, how it comes to be, the authorship, the context in which they appear, the actual behavior, how it's made. Then to identify these risk factors. And of course, on the third note, to verify, upon knowing already these risk factors, the risk factors we identified, if the theories in criminology, which have been built throughout the centuries with many great authors authoring them, if they would actually be suitable to better understand the criminogenic effects of these risks, if they would help us explain how these risks work. And if so, that would give us a hint that it actually, the criminological lens would actually suffice and be a good approach in the future. So in terms of methodology, to do so, we already know that there have been a lot of quantitative studies on corruption. Most surveys are quantitative, but there has been literature saying there is a lack of qualitative studies, in-depth studies to specific cases of corruption. And so, and in order to do what we wanted to do, to really understand the dynamics of these risks and not just point them out, we needed to have a real close experience of intimate experiences of how these risk dynamics play out in the actual field. To do so, of course, we needed to interview, to have the narration, an interview, a conversation, an intimate conversation with people who were actually on the scene. And for that matter, we had, of course, the employees, the local government officials. So to do so, we aimed at doing semi-structured interviews. Why semi-structured? Because, of course, we are talking about a really sensitive topic. So to do structured interviews would allow us to have more maneuverability, more steering on the conversation if something made people uncomfortable. Of course, we didn't assume anything. It was unbiased, at least to the extent we could. It was an unbiased, of course, interview. So we also used the snowballing effect, which means that it was a chain process to recruit members. The first member, the first interviewee that we actually got and was willing to be interviewed, then recommended us to 3 other interviewees that were willing to do the interviews, and so on and so forth. So this said, then we made a thematic analysis. So we transcribed everything. We made it through NVivo, and then we proceeded to make it interpret the data and make it thematic analysis, code everything, and then interpret the data to have our results. And that was pretty much our research. So now, unveiling the results. What did we get? So the first thing that we need to know about this issue is that we had a lot of codes. We had a lot of codes, and it was quite a complex, as we expected and imagined. It was quite complex to make reason and to understand everything in a clear way. Nevertheless, we divided the results in 2 sections. First, to answer the first question, so to the first objective, so to characterize corruption, and then to identify the risks. So in terms of the characterization of corruption, we need to talk about 2 different things, which is incidence, diffusion and distribution, and then behavioral authorship, description. So first, we are going to talk about how it is spread. And to do so, one of the first characteristics that emerged from the interviews was that the corrupt practices, from their point of view, occurred with high frequency in local governments, and it was also concluded that the majority of participants had been aware of cases of passive corruption. So there was also a perception that the phenomenon was widespread throughout local government in Portugal. This does not mean, however, that the volume of acts and their nature was the same throughout the local governments. Elements such as size, frequency, and the seriousness of the offense were conditioned by the size of the local authority. We saw that too. So interviews showed that acts of corruption may be more frequent, but less so, but less serious in smaller governments, but potentially in larger local governments, the frequency was lower of these incidents, but the seriousness was higher, was bigger. And so this was some, of course, this is quite brief representation of our findings. Then, of course, we had the characteristics, size, and frequency of the corrupt behavior. We saw that it also varied with each local government, depending on the functional, operational, and structure particularities of each department. So not only between local governments, but also between departments. And so alongside public procurement, areas such as public and private construction, and the human resources area showed to be the areas in which the corruption appeared to be to have the most incidents. And so, and of course, related to petty corruption. And that's where we're going into now. So in terms of behavior, so the three main behaviors that we identified in which the definition of corruption that we saw earlier actually was in privileged information exchange. So when someone wants some specific information about a process within the local government jurisdiction, and they tell because it's a friend, and the in helping speeding administrative processes, or just doing administrative processes, and of course procurement processes manipulation. So when we have a public offer on some public contract, and we need to call enterprises to come and give their budgets, and these type of processes were highly manipulated and highly influenced by these corruption, at least in the experience and vision of these local government officials. So defining corruption also was seen as something quite complex, as not all of them agreed that what they saw as corruption, what the experiences they had was actually corruption. Although the definition was there, they did not feel that the word would reflect well what happened there. And that's something that we could discuss later on. So then, in terms of authorship, we saw, of course, that senior officials were the one that practiced the most these corrupt behaviors. We saw that lower level officials and the technical levels practiced less acts, and of course, the seriousness tended to be lower too. But corruption could be made, of course, as we know, across all hierarchical levels, as we know that the condition is to have a public power, so interested power and an abuse of that interested power. So the severity and scale of the act of corruption depended on the position of the person, the power that they have, the resources that the employee had, but also the resources of the department itself in which the employee worked on. And then, of course, in terms of context, petty corruption and bureaucratic corruption. So these are two definitions of corruption, and these definitions of corruption are related to small situation corruptions where the sums of money involved are small and where there is possibly an intimate relationship somehow, some kind of intimacy, whether a friendship, a love relation, or familiarity, or other types of relations, but a close proximity between two persons in which there is an exchange of a favor, whether administrative procedure or privileged information, or even the procurement processes manipulation. But these are considered, in comparison with other types of bigger forms of corruption, these are considered lower types of corruption, and are called, for example, bureaucratic corruption, since it is most of the times related to how bureaucratic and how slow the administrative proceedings and systems are. So these were the main results in terms of the characterization on the authorship, etc., of the acts of corruption. Then we have, of course, some of the things that are still important to say regarding this issue. First and foremost, petty corruption. We saw that these small types of corruption have been decreasing, maybe related to, as we know, an awareness that has been raising throughout the years with the idea of transparency and ethics in the workplace. And so we know that all of these situations that has been happening throughout the years, this development on the anti-corruption awareness has been having a toll in these lower forms of corruption. However, new forms of offenses have been arising, such as, and the frequency, and we are not sure and interviewees were not sure on the frequency of these new offenses, which are adapting to the new forms of vigilance, to the new codes of conduct, to the new laws that have been in place in order to prevent corruption. So there are new challenges with these offenses. We could not say through the interviewees, and they were not sure if corruption has been decreasing or if we are just not aware, and it has become more hindered, more occlusive, more shadowy, as remaining in the shadows. So it has been not as statistically represented as it was before, because people were not as aware of the preventative measures in place and the supervisions, and right now they are, so they try to hinder it, and the actions have been more complex. So this was in what concerns the description of the acts of corruption. Then, of course, we have the local risk factors. So we found 8 local risk factors, and these risk factors were culture, training, leadership, proximity, economic pressure, ease of action, probability of detection, and feeling of impunity. And I will talk a little bit about each one of them right now when we discuss the pyramid of corruption. So we have these 8 risk factors, which all interlaced with each other, they intertwine. So it was not easy to understand how we could do an analytical model just by phrasing them and explaining each one of them. But then, of
Hi,
course,
Leonardo.
yes.
So sorry for the interruption, but we are already running out of time.
Okay.
We need to close now. I don't know if you want to send a final 10-second message. Yeah. So
Yeah,
sorry
sure.
for that. Yeah.
No, it's okay. So what we found basically was that the culture and training were related to institutionalization and rationalization processes. So they helped the employee and surpass ethical barriers that they could possibly have, and that would impede them, prevent them from actually having this, taking this behavior. Then we had the meso level, in which leadership, risk leadership, proximity to the community, and the economic pressure, whether from the community or from the actual person, would also increase the tendency to commit these crimes. And then, of course, in a situational level, the ease of action, how easy it was to commit the act, how reduced was the probability of detection, and of course, how severe and how frequent were the punishments, would also lead them to commit the acts. So therefore, this made our framework, our pyramid, in which they were interlaced in several levels, but all of them intertwine with each other. And so this made us understand, of course, and to finish, that there are new opportunities for public policy. So we understood that developing targeted preventive strategies could be related to actually identifying these risk factors and understanding them in a better way. On a second note, of course, we need to establish through these risk factors and through the understanding that criminology gives us, how we could perhaps clear the legal definitions, which are somehow in a place of ambiguity, and also takes out the credibility of the law also from within those who work under conditions in which corruption could happen. And then, of course, the actual opportunities for public policy reform and for research in terms of the criminological and qualitative research aspect, as they shown to be great assets in understanding at a deeper level how criminology and how research in corruption could actually go to a more understandable understandable and understanding point of view in which the criminal policy and the legal and the legislation could be steered and guided towards a more effective and therefore preventive approach. And so these were
Okay.
the implications that we
Leonardo,
found.
I'm so sorry
Yeah,
to interrupt you again, but we have to start our next session in just a couple of minutes.
of course.
So really, thank you for your presentation. Thank you, everyone attending this session. Remember, you can contact Leonardo through the Huba website. Just follow the conversation, do more questions. Yeah, thank you for everything, and see you on the other rooms of this beautiful conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much.